Of Gingee and its rulers. Chapter 4, The Rule of Krishnappa Nayaka continued. The death of the Vijayanagara Emperor Venkata I in 1614 AD led to a tragic civil war between the feudal adherents of the legal claimant to the throne, headed by Yachamanayaka, and the supporters of the putative son of Venkata, headed by the infamous Jaggaraya. One of the allies of Jaggaraya was Krishnappa Nayaka of Gingee, who, with Muthu Veerappa Nayaka of Madura, espoused the wrong cause and suffered in the end. Though Venkata had 6 wives, he had no issue by any one of them. The senior consort, Vayambika, anxious to secure the rule for herself, contrived, according to Bharata, to appear as having become enceinte and given birth to a male child, which was in reality a child born to a Brahman woman of the palace. Venkatavan was evidently unaware of this fraud at that time and accepted the child as his own for the love he bore the queen and even made the child the crown prince. But before his death, he had changed his mind and nominated his nephew as his successor. The nephew, who was called Sri Ranga, was very weak and unfit to rule and failed to justify his choice. Bharadas distinctly states that the new king displeased 3 of his great nobles who had been secretly plotting with Jaggaraya and who, with the help of other allies, forced the Raya to surrender and crowned his own nephew, the putative prince. All the nobles and feudatories of the empire rendered homage to the new ruler, except Yachamanayaka, the leader of the loyalists, who refused to acknowledge the usurper and encountered a war. Yachamanayaka was the chief of Venkatagiri, and he stood firmly by the side of Sriranga. He succeeded in securing one of the sons of Sriranga by a curious device through the washerman of the palace. According to the Ramarajyamu, the Sahitya Ratnakara, and the Raghunatha Abhyudayam, the rescued boy was called Rama. The barbarous action of Jaggaraya in slaying the king and the royal family caused a serious reaction, and many deserted him and joined Yachmanayak. A fierce battle took place between Jaggaraya and the allies at Topur near the Grand Anicut in 1617 AD, where Jaggaraya had fled with his putative nephew. Ramadeva II, the only surviving son of Sriranga, was then proclaimed king. This great civil war of Vijayanagara lasted from 1614 to 1617 and caused a considerable dislocation. The short-lived rule of Ranga II, son of the brother of Venkata, has not got much interest for us. Queiroz tells us that he was a prudent man, and he was indeed at first anxious to renounce his rights and retire into peaceful obscurity and not become the cause of bloodshed which he foresaw was bound to ensue after the death of Venkata. Ranga had spent time before his enthronement in Tanjore, where he had made the acquaintance of several Vellalas of Jaffnapatnam, and whom he now appointed to various posts in his service. This act of his caused much discontent among the old nobles of the court. It is considered by Manuel Bharadas, who is one of the chief sources of our information and was the provincial of the Jesuit province of Malabar, and whose account was published by Robert Sewell in his Forgotten Empire, chapter 17, that Ranga compelled some of the captains of his army to leave the fortress, probably Vellore, and kept others by his side. And it was this action that is held to have precipitated the rebellion of Jaggaraya, who was one of the 3 chiefs who did not pay homage to him at the time of his accession. According to Bharadas, he could put 20,000 men into the field and had a revenue of 6 lakh crusados. He was assisted by Timma Naik, who had territories yielding 4 lakhs crusaders of revenue and kept an army of 12,000 men. The third of the chief conspirators was Makaraju or Makaraja, who had a revenue of 2 lakh crusaders and could muster in the field 6,000 men, and who has been identified with one of the Karvetinagar chiefs by Mr. H. Krishna Sastri. These three chiefs spread the rumor that the new Emperor Ranga did not belong at all to the Aravidu family but had been fraudulently imposed on the kingdom. They first concealed their disaffection till the Raya had openly alienated the three prominent captains of the kingdom, namely the Dalavai, the minister, and one Naraparaju, who was a brother of the widow of the late king. There were also other nobles besides these six involved in the conspiracy. When their plot had matured, Jagga, Timma, and Makka contrived to enter the fort with large bodies of armed men. Jaggaraya left 1,000 men at the first gate and another body of 1,000 at the second gate, while the Dalavai seized two other gates on the other side of the fort. He then compelled Ranga to make a promise to surrender and pledged his word to him that he would do him no ill. Soon Ranga left the tower in which he was staying with his wife and children, as Jaggaraya insisted that his nephew must be crowned king, he being the son of the late monarch. According to the Raghunatha Abhyudayam, Jaggaraya's rebellion took place after the new emperor had ruled for some time, perhaps about a month or more. The crowning of the usurper by Jaggaraya probably took place in the fort of Vellore. We are told that Jaggaraya found a great quantity of jewels and precious stones in the palace, but his action is indicative of his political talents. He first attempted to reconcile the deposed monarch to his new position because, according to Queiroz, he gave half the imperial revenue to him and treated him with great consideration. Yachama was the only one of the chiefs at the capital who refused to join Jaggaraya. He was known by the names of Pedda Yachama and Yachasurudu. His brother-in-law, as noted above, dedicated to him the poem Bahulasva Charitam, from which we gather details about him. Yachama now took the field with his army numbering about 8,000 soldiers, in spite of all persuasions on the part of Jagga. He attempted to obtain access to the imprisoned emperor and, by means of a contrivance, got hold of the second son of the latter, aged about 12 years, secreting and conveying him in a bundle of washerman's cloths. The above mentioned Jesuit account of the rescued Prince Rama, who later on was placed on the throne after the civil war, which ended in a complete victory for Yachama and his ally, is confirmed by the Rama Rajyamu, by the Sahitya Ratnakara, and by the Raghunatha Abhyudayam. Jaggaraya was greatly depressed by the escape of this prince, and as a consequence, he doubled the guard set over the deposed emperor and even subjected him to partial starvation. But soon there arose numerous defections from his camp to Yachamanayaka's side. Failing in all his attempts at escape, the unfortunate emperor was killed by his captors. There are different accounts of his end, which was accompanied by the slaying of his elder son and even of his little daughter, mainly through the instrumentality of Chinna Obaraya, the younger brother of Jagga. A letter from the Portuguese Viceroy of Goa to King Philip III, dated December 31, 1614, announces the fact of the regicide, and this might have taken place a short time before, being confirmed by epigraphic testimony. After the murder of Ranga and his family, confusion intensified everywhere, and according to the testimony of Baradas, many of the remaining loyal chiefs went over to the side of Yachama. Jagga's army was thoroughly defeated, the royal insignia were taken from him, and the prince, that is the second son of Ranga, who had been already rescued from his hands, was proclaimed as the rightful king. Jagga and his partisans were forced to take refuge in the forest. The Bahulasva Charitram mentions the younger brother of Yachama and his brother-in-law Chenna and says that the latter fought with the Nayaka of Madhura, who was persuaded to join Jagga after his defeat. Chenna was the captain general of the army of the loyalists, who now requested the Nayak of Tanjore to take up the cause of the rightful Prince Rama. After some negotiations, in the course of which Yachama Nayak proceeded on his way to Tanjore to get the assistance of Raghunatha, we learn from the Raghunatha Abhyudayam that the traitors to the empire had effected a junction with the rulers of Tundira or Gingee and Pandya or Madura, and with their armies were hunting for the late emperor's surviving son to put him to death. The Sahitya Ratnakara further says that the Parasikas, that is the Portuguese, were allied with the Nayak of Madura in favor of the nephew of Jaggaraya. Father Heras denies that the Portuguese joined the war at all on the ground that if they had done so, both Baradas and the Viceroy of Goa would have mentioned it. Perhaps the Parasikas might have merely meant a body of Musalman soldiers. Baradas records towards the end of his account, which was, however, not published by Sewell, an actual agreement of this body with the party of the young king. The particular war to which this has reference is doubtful. Raghunatha, the loyal Nayak of Tanjore, who was a bosom friend of Ranga II and had helped him on previous occasions, immediately joined the party of the loyalists and proceeded to Kumbakonam to effect a junction with the legitimate ruler and to celebrate his coronation at that holy place on the Kaveri. Raghunatha then entrusted his kingdom to the charge of his famous minister Govinda Dikshita and took a solemn vow to proceed against the treacherous Pandya and his allies, that is Muthu Veerappa Nayak, Jaggaraya and others. The Nayak of Gingee, Krishnappa, was one of the allies of Jaggaraya. His name, however, is not mentioned by Bharadas, but both the Raghunatha Abhyudayam and the Bahulasva Charitram mention this piece of information. Thus, the three great Nayaks of the Tamil country were involved in this momentous civil war, which commenced towards the end of 1614 or in the beginning of 1615 and lasted up to the end of 1616, since Bharadas, writing at the end of 1616, distinctly states that the war was continued these 2 years. From the beginning, the legitimist party gradually gained strength, and the Nayak of Madura cut the great dam across the Kaveri in order to prevent the enemy from advancing further south. Jaggaraya was wandering with his forces near Srirangam when this action was done. Bharada states that at the end of 1616, the Nayak of Tanjore, though not so powerful and resourceful as the Madura Nayak, was with the aid of the young king setting the upper hand, and the legitimists had assembled in large numbers in the open plains round Trichinopoli. Raghunatha Nayak marched with his army to Topur or Tohur, situated on the southern bank of the Kaveri, about 2 miles west of the great Anicut. He first encamped at the village of Palamaneri and prepared for battle, and on the next morning gave fight to the enemy after arranging his cavalry in semicircular formation. Quote, the troops of the Pandya, the Nayak of Madura, could not stand the attack, broke and fled from the field. End of quote. Then Jaggaraya became enraged with fury on seeing the defeat of his ally and advanced against Raghunatha of Tanjore. The sight of the traitor Jaggaraya advancing to attack him in person made Raghunatha furious. The infantry of the legitimists checked Jaggaraya's advance. A bloody fight ensued. In the course of the struggle, Jaggaraya and some of his relatives and attendants were killed by the spears of the Tanjore infantry. Jaggaraya's death was the signal for a general flight of the rebel army. Krishnappa Nayak of Gingee also fled from the battlefield, making himself ridiculous in the eyes of his officers. The Madura Nayak was one of the last to abandon his post and fought on till many of the important officers under him had fled. Then he began to grow anxious for his personal safety and fled from the field for the distance of a league, but was captured by the soldiers of Raghunatha Nayak and brought before him. Raghunatha pardoned his rival of Madura, gaining great glory by the act. Then he ordered a pillar of victory to be erected on the banks of the Kaveri. The Battle of Topur was fought between December 1616, when Baradas finished his account, and November 1617, which is the date of Father Rubino's letter mentioning Jaggaraya's death some months before. Probably it took place in the first half of 1617. Jaggaraya's brother, by name Yatiraja, now headed the rebel party, joined the Nayak of Gingee and others, and prepared again to offer battle to Raghunatha. The Tanjore Nayak quickly dispatched an army under one of his generals to attack the Gingee territory and the fortresses in it. This army quickly captured Bhuvanagiri, a few miles to the northwest of Chidambaram, on the banks of the Vellar, and also some other fortresses in the neighborhood. He then encountered the army of Krishnappa Nayaka in battle and obtained a great victory. Yatiraja continued to resist the legitimate emperor for some time longer. And according to the Bahulasva Charitam, Yachama Nayak, the protector of the emperor, indeed won a victory over Yatiraja in the neighborhood of Palayam Kotai in the Chidambaram taluk of the South Arcot district. This shows that the campaigns of 1617 after the death of Degaraya were mainly fought in the region subject to the Gingee Nayak. A reconciliation was effected between Raghunatha and the Madura Nayak, who offered one of his daughters in marriage to the former, according to the Raghunatha Abhyudayam of Vijayaraghava. The drama Raghunatha Vilasa Natakam tells us of the fact that the Nayaks of Madura and Tanjore effected a family union and subsequently recognized the son of the murdered Sriranga as the rightful emperor. The Nayak of Gingee probably presented his homage to the new ruler about the same time, for he is said to have ruled over his state in complete peace after these events. Yatiraja, the rival brother of Jaggaraya, himself seems to have submitted to the legitimate king and ruled over a petty principality in the neighborhood of Pulicat. Effect of the civil war on the strength of the empire and on the position of the Nayaks. Quote, this war was extremely disastrous for the country. Naturally, 3 years of continuous fighting tended to impoverish the whole kingdom. Both the Portuguese and English records, which we shall quote later on, speak of the miserable state of agriculture and the meager efforts of trade. Besides, the famous thieves of the forests between Madura and the Marava country became very bold when they saw the rulers of the land engaged in waging war among themselves. The devastations in the Madura country were as calamitous as the war itself. They even dared to maraud the villages around the capital itself. A Jesuit letter informs us that it was very dangerous to go from place to place, for the public roads were so infested with the miscreants that everybody was afraid of losing not only their fortunes but their very lives. Quoted from Journal of Indian History, Volume 5, page 186. Yachama Nayaka, the real hero of this civil war, deserved the title of the father of his country and the savior of the empire. According to the collection of stray verses called Chatupadya Ratnakaram, a crore of Jaggaraya, 70 crores of Makaraja's father, and 1,16,000 of Ravella Venkas put together would not be a match for Yacha, who bore the title of Ibbaraganda, just as any number of goats joining together would not be a match for the tiger. End of quote. We do not also hear much of Yachama Nayak subsequent to this war, except that Venkatagiri, the headquarters station of the family, was put into the possession of Yachama on the successful execution of this mission. Yachama was the son of Kasturi Rangappa and first ruled over Permidi with his capital at Madurantakam. He is famous for his two military achievements, with the Battle of Uttaramallur in 1602, in which he defeated Peddanayudu with the help of his younger brother Sarvagna Singamanayudu, and the Battle of Topur. He also distinguished himself by victories in Chengalput, Palayam Kotai, Gingee, and Trichinopoly. When Krishnappa Nayak rebelled in the early part of the reign of Venkatavan in 1604, he was put into prison by the latter. Then Raghunatha, who was at that time the crown prince of Tanjore, marched to Penukonda to help the emperor against Mohammedan invasions, and in return for his help, secured the release of Krishnappa Nayaka. As a mark of gratitude for his kind intervention, Krishnappa Nayaka gave one of his daughters in marriage to Raghunatha. In spite of the service thus rendered to him by Raghunatha, Krishnappa Nayaka allied himself with Jaggaraya and the rebel party on the outbreak of the civil war of succession. For this act of ingratitude to his ally and to his overlord, Krishnappa met with much misfortune that he fully deserved. We have no definite information as to whether Krishnappa Nayak of Gingee rendered homage to the new emperor Ramadeva. An inscription acknowledges the overlordship of Ramadeva to be in the cyclic year 1644 AD. We can assume that Krishnappa Nayaka and later his son rendered homage to Ramadeva, who was established on the throne by the efforts of Raghunatha Nayaka. The later Nayaks of Gingee. The successors of Krishnappa Nayak were insignificant. According to the Mackenzie manuscripts, we hear of two Nayaks by name Varadappa Nayak and Appaya Nayak, who were merely noted for their imbecility. An inscription of Tiruparankundram in Madura district refers to Varadappa Nayaka of Gingee, who gave some land and a golden palanquin, Amdala, to god Kumaraswamy on his way back from Setu Rameshwaram, whither he had gone on pilgrimage. There is another inscription in Telugu, 860 of 1918, of the same place referring to the same Nayak. The date given in the inscriptions is Saka 1593, equivalent to AD 1670-71. This date cannot be accepted in view of the fact that the Mohammedans occupied Gingee some years before this event, about 1660 AD. Probably the Nayak enjoyed merely the nominal title. The last of the Nayaks, that is Appa Nayak, has been described as weak and extremely vicious, and as one who was responsible for the easy conquest of Gingee by the Mohammedans. Taylor's Catalogue, Raisani of Manuscripts, Volume 3, page 31, refers to the Chenji Rajakal Kaifiyat, which consciously endeavored to glorify the heroism of the last of the rulers of Gingee, who aided his troops in person, and when he found himself deserted by them, rode on alone and unsupported into the ranks of the enemy, dealing destruction around him until he was overpowered and slain. The liberality of the Nayak and his wife is also lauded in the Kaifayat. End of chapter 4. We'll look at notes. Note 1. We have read that about 1586 AD, Krishnappa Nayaka, the Nayak of Gingee, appears to have rebelled against Venkata I. Troops were marched against him under one Venkata, a brother of Ankabhupala, the Kalahasti chief, and he was brought a prisoner, probably to Penukonda, and there confined. And Venkata was evidently put in charge of it. Raghunatha Nayak of Tanjore secured his release, and the grateful Krishnappa offered his daughter in marriage to Raghunatha. Krishnappa was evidently a wise ruler and kept his capital Gingee in an excellent condition. The Jesuit letters speak highly of its strength and wealth and refer to it as the Troy of the East. He founded a town near Porto Novo called Krishnapatam after himself. Among his subordinates were Lingamanayaka of Vellore, the Nayaka of Tiruvati near Pandruti in the Sautarkad district, and the Solaga, who figures in the Raghunatha Abhyudayam and the Sahitya Ratnakara. About 1600, he refused to pay the customary tribute, and Venkata I was about to send an army against him when the news of his insanity, which was, however, a pretense, prevented the Raya from taking such a step. Krishnappa sent an embassy in 1604 to Venkata, but nothing evidently came of it. And war was declared in 1607, and Yachama Nayak, the Velugoti chief, was probably in command of the forces, as the Velugotivari Vamshavali states, that he captured Gingee in the reign of Venkata I. Krishnappa was taken prisoner and Venkata advanced from Vellore and obtained his submission in person. About 1603, Lingama Nayaka, son of Chinnabomma Nayaka of Vellore, rebelled. He was loyal up to 1601 when, at his request, the Vilapaka grant was made. Lingama appears to have chafed at his dependence on the Nayak of Gingee and even on Venkata himself. He had amassed immense wealth and had the fort at Vellore, which even then was reputed to be one of the strongest and most beautiful of its kind known in southern India. Venkata sent out his Dalavai, who was evidently Damarla Chenna of the Kalahasti family. He advanced rapidly to attack and storm the fort, but he was early opposed on the way at a place called Munnali or Minnal by Lingama's forces, which he defeated. He then pushed on with a view to reach Vellore unexpectedly at the dawn of the following day. But his forces lagged behind, and the advanced storming party met with a warm fire from the defenders. Chenna had to retreat, but undaunted, he again invested the fortress despite the prevailing rains. The siege dragged on for a couple of months, and at the end, Lingama was eventually taken prisoner by a stratagem almost at the very gates of his fortress. Negotiations began with a view to induce Chenna to abandon even the siege operations. But the 20 lakhs that were offered to him would not tempt him. He sent word to Venkata that this was the time to fill his coffers and annex this strongly fortified town. Venkata hastened to the spot in January 1604 with a large army and a number of camp followers and elephants. Lingama received him with due humility, but his sons still kept up a continuous fire and endeavored their utmost to prevent Venkata from entering the city. But all was of no use. Vellore at last surrendered, and Venkataraya and his queen took up their residence in the marble palace of Lingamanayaka, adorned with gold and precious stones. End of note. Sorry, continues. The note continues. Vellore itself became a second royal residence from about 1606. This fact is mentioned in the Rama Rajyamu, though not registered in contemporary inscriptions. Several Jesuit letters, however, confirm this statement of the Rama Rajyamu. Evidently, it was not treated as the formal capital of the empire, though used as a royal residence by Venkata I. Hence, the sobriquet it still enjoys as Raya Veluru, that is, Vellore of the Raya, that is Venkata I, who first took up his residence in it. End of note. Next note. Yachama Nayak was of the 20th generation of the Velugoti family. According to a family history of Venkatagiri Rajas by Alladi Jagannatha Shastri, 1922, he was famous for two military achievements. One in a battle of 1602 at Uttaramallur when he put to flight a number of enemies, and the second in another fight when he espoused the cause of his Vijayanagar protege. Yachama Nayak would not side with Jaggaraya but helped in the escape of a prince of the royal family, all of whom were imprisoned by Jaggaraya. The boy was 12 years of age and was smuggled in a bundle of soiled linen. This boy was later on acclaimed emperor, and Yachama took the crown and royal ornaments of his father as booty from Jaggaraya's camp. The description given by Kalahasti Damarla Vengala Bhupala in his Telugu work Bahulashva Charitram bears ample testimony to the military and victorious career of Yachasura and to many other victories at Uttaramallur, Chengalput, Palayam Kottai, Madura, Gingee and Trichinopoly. End of note. Next note. Venkata had two of his young nephews, the sons of his brother Rama, the viceroy at Srirangapatam, brought up at his court and near his person. When his brother Rama, the viceroy, died, Venkata sent the elder of his two sons to succeed his father in the viceroyalty and kept the younger, called Ranga or Sriranga, with him. Venkata seems also to have early designed him for the succession to himself and brought him up virtually as his heir presumptive, even giving him the title of Chikkaraya, which, as it was understood at the time, meant the heir presumptive. One of his queens, however, who remained childless and was believed to be so even by Venkata himself, apparently cherished other ambitions and produced a baby, which she claimed to be her own child and which she brought up in the palace as her son without Venkata doing anything to prevent the course, with the result that she was strengthened in the belief that she had the countenance of the emperor in regard to the presumptive claim of this putative boy to the throne. On his deathbed, however, Venkata, notwithstanding the protests, whether sincere or not, we are not certain, of Prince Ranga, his nephew, nominated him as his successor and thus brought about a conflagration which well nigh destroyed the empire completely. The queen, who claimed to have a son, belonged to the powerful family of the Goburi chiefs, and her brother Jaggaraya was perhaps also, in consequence of his relationship to the Raya, the most powerful nobleman of the empire, and possessed of the largest resources in the state, was next only to the emperor. He probably found it would be more advantageous to himself and would meet the needs of his own ambition better if the putative boy nephew of his were placed on the throne instead of Ranga, who had received already some training as prince and was said to possess a mind of his own and expected to take his own line in the government of the empire. Immediately after the installation of Ranga, Jaggaraya started a movement trying to enlist the nobles of the empire on his side, as many as was possible. This attempt to set aside the succession of Ranga gradually developed to the extent of a great many of the feudatories of rank in the empire joining Jagga and left the new emperor Ranga without the help of chieftains of rank, with the exception of one doughty champion of his obviously forlorn cause in Velugoti Yachamanayaka, the real founder of the family of Venkatagiri. Jaggaraya was able gradually to surround the palace and set his own guards over the new Raya, making him entirely powerless in the administration and later actually imprisoning him in one of his palaces under his own guard. He then proclaimed his own nephew to be the rightful emperor instead of Ranga, who had ascended the throne. This was opposed single handed by Yachamanayaka, who gradually developed his resources and strengthened his party by gaining a few allies. Thus began the Great War of Succession in Vijayanagar. It took 2 years of confusion and anarchy in the land before the fateful struggle could come to a final decision. It was the massacre of the royal family that precipitated the war, Jaggaraya having ordered the wholesale murder in cold blood of Ranga and all his family, who were practically his prisoners. Before the day appointed for the purpose, Yachamanayaka had, however, managed cleverly to secure the possession of Ranga's second son by name Rama, who was about 10 or 12 years of age, the elder brother being too grown up for the purpose of concealment, as the arrangement was that a washerman was to smuggle the boy out of the fort in his bundle of soiled linen. After a number of skirmishes, the war was ultimately decided at the fateful and decisive Battle of Topur, the village now being called Tohur and situated quite close to the Grand Anicut on the southern bank of the Kaveri. Among the principal governors of the empire, the Nayaka of Tanjore was the only one that remained loyal, all the other Nayaks having joined the side of Jaggaraya. The battle went against Jaggaraya, who also fell in the field, and this young Prince Rama was installed as emperor by Raghunatha Nayaka of Tanjore at Kumbakonam, where there is a temple built to God Rama in memorial thereof. This Ramaraya, who was a mere boy at the time of his fateful accession to the throne, ruled over Vijayanagar down to the year 1630, his father Ranga having hardly been Raya for more than a month after his accession. When he was installed in due form as the undisputed emperor in 1616 or 1617, he could count upon the support of Raghunatha Nayaka of Tanjore, who officiated at his accession, and the loyal chieftain Yachamanayaka, with perhaps a few more chiefs of comparatively minor rank. All the other feudatories of the empire were up in arms or at least had compromised themselves by taking up arms against him, and it was a question of almost conquering the empire over again before it could be brought into effective loyalty to him. End of note. Next note. From letter dated Cochin, December 12, 1616 AD, and found in the National Archives at Lisbon. Next note. H. Krishnasastri's The Third Vijayanagara Dynasty Archaeological Survey of India Report for 1911 to 1912, page 188, note 3. Next note. This work mentions Yachamanayak as Yachabhupati and Yachamahipa in Canto 13, Shlokas 76 and 78. End of note. Next note. According to Baradas, the poor king with his own hand beheaded his wife and his little daughter and then killed himself by falling upon his sword. His eldest son killed his wife in a similar manner and then put an end to his own life. End of note. Next note. The Sahitya Ratnakara in Canto 13, 78 and 83 says that someone should have broken the dam at the instigation of Jaggaraya. Ramabhadramba, the authoress of the Raghunathabhyudayam, distinctly says that the dam should have been cut up by the rulers of the West. Raghunathabhyudayam, Canto 9, 26th verse. Next note. The Raghunatha Abhyudayam of Vijaya Raghava fixes the date of this encampment in the cyclic year Nala, month Ashadha, Shuddha Panchami, August 1616. There was probably an interval before the actual battle took place. End of note. Next note. Yatiraja figured to be a prominent degree in the events of Carnatic in the subsequent decades. He took up his brother's cause and rose to prominence as the chief of the territories that took in Pulicat and Armagon, which Yachama tried to retain effectively in his own hands. Gradually, King Rama and Yachama, his guardian, consolidated their position, though we hear of wars in the neighborhood of Pulicat between Yachama Nayak and Gobbiri Yatiraja in 1622. As a measure of reconciling himself with Yatiraja, King Rama married a daughter of his who is described as the second wife of the Raya. Yatiraja had plenty of trouble with the European powers, settled on the coast of his dominions, with the Dutch at Pulicat and the Portuguese at Santhome. End of that note. Next note. Page 172, Volume 1, Rangachari, Inscriptions of the Madras Presidency, number 359 of Vala, or Bala Venkatapati Nayakan, son or descendant of Vala Krishnappa Nayakan, dated Saka 1386, equivalent to AD 1464. Next note. Number 11, Historical 2. Number 2293, Chenji Rajakal Kaifiyat. Old number 232, CM 98, Kings of Gingee. Quote, this is a manuscript of 28 palm leaves damaged by worms. It is written in Tamil verse of an easy kind. Its chief object is to celebrate the heroism of the last of the Rajas of Gingee of the dynasty, proceeding from the original viceroy from Vijayanagaram. The final defense of the fort of Gingee was very obstinate. According to this poem, the Raja headed his troops in person, and whom he found himself no longer supported by them. He rode among the Mohammedans, dealing destruction around him until overpowered and slain. This rashness the writer magnifies into extraordinary heroism. The liberality of the king and his queen in gifts is greatly lauded in this poem. End of quote. End of notes. So here ends chapter 4. Next is chapter 5, the Musalman conquest of Gingee. We'll read that in the next video.